For our first example in this lesson, we're going to take a look at counter-controlled iteration in more detail, and specifically the key elements of counter-controlled iteration. And the reason we're going to do that is so we can then show you the comparison between the while loop that we're going to look at in this example and the for iteration statement that we're going to introduce in the next example. So as you can see here, we're now working with the examples from the CH06 folder, and specifically the project we want is in the fig06_01 folder. So let me go ahead and open up that project. And as you can see here, we have a very simple little class with a main method, and I'll run it first so you can see the result, which is simply to display the values from 1 through 10. So we're going to use a little counter-controlled iteration for that purpose. And what I want to point out are the key elements of counter-controlled iteration. The first key element is declaring and initializing the control variable that helps control how many times we're going to iterate. So we have an integer control variable in this case called counter. So we introduce the name of that variable, and we also introduce the initial value for that variable, which is the starting point for our counter-controlled iteration. Next, we have the while loop here, which is going to perform the iteration, and it has a loop continuation condition that says to keep looping, keep iterating, as long as counter is less than or equal to 10. So this loop continuation condition specifies the final value of the control variable. This loop will continue iterating up until the point where counter becomes 11, and only then will the loop terminate. Now, during each iteration of this loop, the work that the loop is going to perform is to simply display the value of counter. But the last key element of counter-controlled iteration in the case of the while loop here is the ++ counter statement, which adds 1 to the variable counter. That's extremely important because it's what causes the continuation condition at line 11 to eventually become false and enable us to get to the end of the program where we simply output a new line.